Yeah, maybe less than 5 minutes actually. So,
Okay. Just pick up a cup of coffee and bring it.
okay. Yeah, maybe less than 5 minutes actually. So,
Okay. Just pick up.
hello, Pratik.
Hey Chanda, how are you?
I'm well, thank you. We are live, so I just want to let you know. Just want to thank everybody for joining us. We'll just get started in just a few minutes while we let everybody else log in. Just take one moment. All right, it looks like we're at about time, and looks like we have a few people who were able to join us. My name is Chinna Choin, and I'm with NACBA and the Consultants Training Institute. Before we get started with the Around the Valuation World International webcast today, I want to go over a few housekeeping items. First, to obtain CPE credit, you must answer all the poll questions that pop up on your screen during today's webinar. There'll be a notification sound when the poll questions are up, but please be attentive just in case you do not hear those sounds. CPE certificates will be available within 7 to 10 business days after the webcast today. If you have any questions during today's webinar, please feel free to use the Q&A option in Zoom or for questions for the presenter. If you have any questions about any CBA or technical questions about Zoom, please feel free to use the chat feature, as those will be directed to me and Avery, who is also on the line. Let's see, there's a little disclaimer. All right. And today, out of our editors, we have Pratik Shah, who will be joining us today. Our other editors are Wolfgang Niest and Andrew Newman, along with Brian. And today we'll have a look at GACBA news, which I will go over, and then I'll turn the time over to Pratik, who will introduce our presenter for today. Just really quick with the GACBA news, we do have our 2023 Business Valuation and Financial Litigation Super Conference coming up. The first one will be in July. It'll be July 12th to the 14th, and also in Salt Lake City Snowbird. It'll also be broadcasted virtually, so if you're unable to attend in person, we invite you to join us virtually. We also have our second version of that on December 13th to the 15th in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. If you have any questions about that, the link is there for more information on our website, but also you're able to reach out to your chapter leaders in your respective chapters that you were at in your different locations, or contact NACBA using the information below. And with that, I'm going to turn the time over to Pratik, who will give us more information about our presenter today.
Hey, thank you, Chanda, and thank you everyone for joining us today on Around the Valuation World. I'm pleased to welcome Dr. Ashok Abbott on today's Around the Valuation World to present his to present this topic, and also I haven't had an opportunity to meet him in one of the NSCVA conferences, and I'm really excited to be part of it today. Uh, just to give you an update on Dr. Abbott, he's an associate professor of finance at West Virginia University in Morgantown. Professor Abbott received his MBA in finance at Virginia Polytechnic Institute and State University in 1984, followed by a PhD in finance also at VPI and SU in 87. His PhD dissertation title was The Valuation Effects of Tax Legislation in Corporate Sell-offs. He has published extensively in scholarly research journals and made presentations at national and international conferences. He serves on the editorial boards of the Business Valuation Review and the Value Examiner. His focus areas are the level of price adjustments, discounts, premiums, appropriate for liquidity and marketability, and identifying causal relationships among variables of interest in valuation. You can definitely go through the link that is provided for his detailed CV. However, just wanted to let you know that this is probably one of the most interesting topics for liquidity and marketability. And I'm sure it's going to be very insightful for all of us. So in case anyone has any questions, please put in the chat box, and we will take it up, as and not as and when it comes, but probably at the right time. With this, I'll hand it over to Dr. Abbott. Thank you, sir, again for joining us, and over to you.
Thanks, Pratik. Now, can I share screen, or are you holding the?
You can, Dr. Abbott, you're able to share the screen now. So go ahead and share your screen.
If you can, because then the presentation is on my screen and I can be showing that as we go along. Okay. All right. So share screen. You can do that screen too. Okay. So you should be seeing that same thing that Pratik just said in a minute. Okay. Can you see that?
Yes, we do now.
Excellent. So now we can get started. That way I can be moving it through, and we can be talking. Okay. All right. Well, it's a pleasure to be here today. This is a good group. I've been with NACWA for, I don't know, maybe 15, 18 years now. I'm an old guy, so you know that. It's also fun because we have been doing a lot of research, a lot of outreach to create awareness about this. This particular paper that we are going to be talking about today is coming in the Journal of Forensic Accounting Research, JFAR, which is kind of the big thing for the forensics part in finance and accounting and taxation. So it's a good place for it to be. So what we are looking at is the availability and the applicability of discounts in valuation. Why is this important? Because if we look at this, if you go back to when the first revenue ruling started, 5960, going back those 60 years or so, about a third of the tax court memos that have been issued cover this area of discounts. Okay, so that is where we essentially have to be looking for this information. So what we are going to be looking at is the difference between liquidity and marketability. So one of the things that has happened is that there is some overlap in our understanding. Also, the glossary definition of marketability kind of subsumes the liquidity part, being able to sell it in an organized market at low cost. That low cost issue becomes a liquidity issue. And then we run into this situation where we have this continuing struggle to move from public markets into private markets. See, that's where we run into this, because all the data that we use, the required rate of return, the cost of capital, the market size, comes from the publicly traded markets. We go, like, for example, CRISP or CompuStat, and we are dealing with companies that are registered. The stock is available on a public exchange, and you can sell at least small quantities of that relatively quickly. So as these studies started way back 60s, when SEC convened the first roundtable, and that's where a lot of the discussion about discount starts, is how trading impacts prices. From that point on, through all the models that have been placed, all the regression models that have been placed, and more recently, starting about 20 years ago, we started using options. In 1995, almost 30 years ago, is the first paper that Longstaff published on looking at the difference. Now, remember that 1995 paper is not a per se discount paper. It looks at the difference between the traded and not actively traded companies. Okay. So the same security, he first started with treasuries in his first two papers. Then the 2001 and 2002 papers are the ones where he looks at specifically what is the discount for lack of marketability, having to wait for a certain period before you can start trading. And that's the approach, the 2001, 2002 approach is that we will be following today. So important thing here is to understand that the liquidity and volatility, the two things that determine how much the discount should be at a given point in time, they vary. And as we will see in some charts as we will follow through, it varies very dramatically over time. And when you start looking at the different sizes, the large firms versus small sizes firms, it's even more pronounced as to how the liquidity and the volatility change and are different at different sizes. Okay. So that is why if we go the options approach, which is in my mind the cleaner approach, because it can guide us to a specific point in time as to what are the conditions. So the equivalent, the DLOM measure that we create based on the conditions, because remember, under the fundamental 5960 ruling, we are talking about the valuation is at a point in time. That's the important part. The same exact company, as we see, changes values by 5%, 10%, 20% over a relatively short period of time. Now, just think about Tesla, for example. SpaceX, a sister company, has this massive rocket ready to go. The price of Tesla is where you expect it to be. And then the rocket blows up. Tesla has nothing to do with the rocket. But since they're part of the same company family, we see Tesla prices drop down by 5 to 7% within about 2 hours of that rocket blowing up. So the DLOM that would be needed would similarly change over different periods of time as the market conditions change. Okay? So the one size does not fit all. So that is the real underlying principle that we will be exploring today. Over time, as conditions change, the measure of discounts, the pricing as well as the discounts changes in response to those conditions, so that one size, so some study in 1968 said 35% DLOM. So I'm quoting that study and putting that in my report, is not quite where it would work. Okay. So the option-based models are good because we can tailor it to the size of the company and the time of the valuation to find what the discount should be. Okay. So today we'll be looking at is that it is a critical and contentious, as we said. About a third of the tax court memos that are issued, they end up dealing with some kind of a discount or a premium. Okay. Now, the exchange option models that we are working with, which essentially Longstaff introduced to the valuation community about 30 years ago, and there's been a lot of work on that ongoing. I mean, I'm working in that area. I have about 6 papers at this point in looking at discounts using the exchange options. Finnerty has published in it. Longstaff's work has been quoted, kind of misquoted at times. There are some publicly available calculators that use the data and try to come up with a DLOM, looking at the option models, some of them correctly, some of them incorrectly. We'll talk about that. Okay. So there are basically 3 extensions of the model that we will talk about. The standard Margrave, which is what Black-Scholes would have been, outsider buyer, outsider seller. Everybody knows the public information. None of the buyer or seller knows the private information. Asian average, also called Finnerty model in one of its iterations, is where everyone knows everything. There's no information hidden or unavailable. Public and private, both information pieces are known. Look back at the other extreme, the so-called Longstaff model, where we are looking at the buyer knows almost nothing, the seller knows everything. So, and that's the condition that we run into a lot of times when it's a closely held company, it's a private placement. We do run into this group where a lot of information, unless the seller takes the effort to create and communicate that option, is not available most of the time. Okay. Our chat question. Okay. Yes, it says the link has been updated, so you should be getting the slides on your machine also, but I'm walking you through those as we go through. Okay. So this is important to know. So we have been talking about the definition of marketability, including the thing saying, okay, it's an organized market, you place an order, 3 days later you have your money. That may be true if you were selling 100 shares of Apple or 1,000 shares of Apple. But for a small, closely held company, that is not something that is really relevant. Why? If you look at this chart that's on your slide right now, what we find is that the daily turnover is very, very small. So if you're looking at, for example, and now it has improved significantly, coming from the 1993 is when the data become available for the first time. And there has been a steady improvement. Okay. So, but this is important. What we see is, for example, in 2008, when there was a big crisis going on, you could sell more than 1.5% of a large firm stock on a given day. But at that point, the demand had dried up for the smaller stocks. You could sell almost nothing on a given day. Okay. So that's what we see. And then the reverse happened in 2020, 21 time when we had a lot of almost free money sloshing through the market. The big bargains have been had for the large companies, and then money moved into the small companies. So there were times in 21 where you could actually sell about 3% of the company on a given day. Okay. So this is where we are. Okay. So if we have a 5, 10, 20, 30% block that we are looking at, it would take a considerable while, and it would take a considerable risk on price of the holder to wait for that time when they can dribble it out. And remember, these numbers are when there is no restriction on transfer. We are not talking about Reg 144, which we will use when we look at private placements, for example. Okay. So, which we know has been changing, has been reduced first from 2 years to 1 year and now to 6 months. This is an important, very important distinction that needs to be made. Those restriction periods that have been reduced belong to what they call compliant companies, where all public information that needs to be issued and communicated is actually all filing have been done with the SEC and they are in public domain. So all that information that has been released is in fact available, and individuals have access to that and are deciding on what they're going to pay based on that. So that's the important part. If you are a dark firm, that is, you are not completely filed every piece of filing that needs to be done for SEC, you are a dark firm, that 6-month period now, or the earlier 1-year period, does not apply to you. Your hard restriction, when you cannot sell any stock, is still 1 year and now, and it used to be 2 years earlier. So that is something to keep in mind. If we are looking at companies that are privately closely held, are not listed on the market, they are essentially dark firms where the information has not been communicated to the public at large. Okay. Now, the second part, see, first was how much can you sell? The second part is how much does it cost to buy and sell? The bid-ask spread. And if you look at it, interestingly enough, for small stocks, it was around 18%, 16 to 18% when in 1993 it starts. And then again, when the crisis hit in 2008, it was again in the 14% range. That's a large amount of money. And this is when there are no marketing restrictions. You have a fully registered stock of a company that is publicly traded in an organized exchange. And that's the kind of discounts you were seeing. Even at the height of the 2020-21, when market was very liquid, still they were around 3 to 4%. Now this is without restrictions. You have the ability to actually pick up the phone, call a broker and try to sell your stock. Okay. So that's what we see. One, small numbers being sold at a given point in time. Two, the cost of that is not zero. For the large stocks, S&P 100, S&P 500, the spread is like a penny. It's not very big. But for small stocks, the spread continues to be substantial. Okay. So now, the third part of this, the volatility. Okay. Remember, we have how long it takes, how much it costs to trade. And this is when you are waiting to trade, how much does the price vary over time? Now, that is something very important, because As we know, in an option, what you're paying for is the certainty that you are getting for a price at a given point in time. Okay. So this is where we come across the notion of volatility. The more uncertain the prices that you can get, bigger the discount you would want. I mean, if you're a buyer, you're saying, look, I'm going to pay you this money. I don't know how much it will be worth tomorrow, so I'm going to pay you a smaller amount of money. If you're a seller, you're saying, look, if I have to hold on to it, I want more money. So the bid-ask spread starts opening up a lot, and the discount on any trade that gets done is substantial from the asking price. So that's what we have to be now looking at that. We know that volatility changes over time. We know that liquidity changes over time, and we know that the trading cost changes over time. So it is important that we cannot simply pick up some study, dust it up, say, oh, 1968, this was the discount. Or like, for example, if we take even something like the raw study, it's, in 2020, this was the discount. But what we need is at the point in time when the transaction took place, what should have been the applicable discount for that size of a firm? Because journal averages are not really are not giving us good information. So here was your first attendance check. I guess you are responding to that right now. Okay. So what we see is that, in fact, there is a very long period of time that stocks are held by the existing owners before they get sold. Okay. So that is what we call the half-life. This is the time that it takes for about half of the stock to turn over. Okay. So if you hold, if the firm has 1 million shares outstanding, about 500,000 will be sold over this period of time. Okay. So what do we see here? We see that this is the entire time period, because we are starting in 1993, because that's when the real numbers start becoming available. Okay. So what we have here is, if you look at this, it was very illiquid for small stocks when we started. So on an average, they will be held about close to 800 days. It would take, that's more than 2 years. Okay. And then during any time, this is aftermath of the 2000 crisis, when the stock markets fell, the dot-com bubble burst. It went as high as 1,000 days. So it would take you 3 years on an average to get rid of a stock. Okay. Once again, in 2008, we again go to that 800 plus days mark. Recently has been wonderful, and we are looking at holding it for less than a year at a given point in time. Okay. But this changes. So any historical studies that have been done around these time periods may not be representative of what we expect to see now. Are there any questions about the changes in the market conditions that have occurred over this 30-year period? If you have any question, please put it in chat. I have a window open on another screen. I can look at it. Okay. If not, we'll keep going. So at this point, what we have established is that the liquidation periods are long and they vary across time and size. The cost of trading, bid-ask spread, can be very high and once again changes significantly across time. And this is all what we have done up to this point is without any trading restrictions. So this is for stock that is fully marketable, not fully liquid, but fully marketable. And as we said in the very first slide, marketability does not create liquidity. Liquidity is done by the market. Also, what we will see is that liquidity is not the same for every investor. So your marketability restrictions, who you are, for example, if you are part of the firm's management, or you're an insider, or you hold more than 10% of the stock, you have, in addition to the 6-month, 1 year, 2 year restriction, you have a dribble out requirement where you cannot sell more than a certain number of shares any given period of time. Okay, that's important because that can make the same stock, even the same block size, held by an insider subject to Rule 144 restrictions, much less valuable than it would be in the hands of an investor that is not bound by those restrictions. Okay? Because the initial 6 months, 1 year, 2 year period is same for both, but at the end of that period, whereas an outsider, non-control holder can sell over these liquidation periods that we have been working with, the insider, the manager, affiliate, designee, cannot sell at these rates. They have to slowly dribble it out depending on whether it's 1% every 90 days or the 5-day trading volume, if it's more than 1% over every 90 days. So their trading period could get extended significantly longer, and therefore the stock that they hold would be subject to a larger discount as compared to an outsider holding the same stock. Okay. So that's where we say. So essentially, we need to be looking at the liquidation period and volatility at that point in time when we are doing the valuation. Okay. So any historical averages are averages in the best sense of the word, in the worst sense of the word. Because they have transactions from different points in time, at which times the markets were either more or less liquid or more or less volatile. So when you have that, you are essentially creating combinations that may not be representative of what was happening at the point in time when this transaction was being done. So what we need is, we need contemporaneous data that come from the time period during which this specific transaction is being done. And equally important, that data has to be, the numbers have to come from a public source that the appraiser, valuer, tax authority, buyer, seller, they should all have access to that data. Because if you're basing any calculations on any given set of data, then those should be available to everyone. That's the essence of scientific method. That if everyone in the transaction is using the same data, the same equation, they will come up with the same number, or they should. If they don't, something is missing. It needs to be clarified. So we need contemporaneous data belonging to the point in time when the transaction is getting done. We need, excuse me, we need it to be verifiable data so that all the participants in the transaction can look at it. Give me a minute. Just getting a cough drop, nothing big. So that everyone can essentially start with the same numbers, end to the same numbers, and therefore be sure that what they are talking about is the same. And we don't want to be pulling things out of thin air. We want to be looking at specific models that are acceptable, that are sound, that is, they've been known to work, and are empirically tractable, that you can add your inputs from the data set that you have, that everybody agrees on, actually happened, and then using those numbers, using these models, be able to calculate a good estimate that, given the number, given the model, will be uniform across everyone that's using that calculation at that point in time. So this is where we have our first input that we have. Before April 1997, the initial holding period was 2 years. Now the 2 years is 504 trading days. Why? Because in a given calendar year of 365 days, we have weekends, we have holidays that the market is closed on. So we have 252 trading days most years. 2 years, we take 504. Then in February 2008, that rule again changed. So from April 97 to 2008, 11 years, we have the 1 year rule. Okay. That 144 transactions after 1 year of holding. Then in February 2008, we came to 6 months or 126 trading days. Okay. Now this is important, that even though these are the fixed restriction periods, when we are looking at discount for lack of marketability, the marketability starts when the restriction period is over. But then the liquidation period starts. Remember what happens? It's not that the day the restriction period is over, you can sell 20, 30, 50% of the company on a given day. As we saw initially, that rarely goes above 2 or 3% a day in the extreme cases. Most cases, the daily transaction volume is not even 1%. So for a fully registered, marketable, unrestricted stock, you could be selling 1/100th of 1% on a given day without impacting price. But once we start getting to 2%, 5%, 10% kind of blocks, there is a liquidation delay. And if this is restricted stock, then when the restriction ends, then that liquidation period starts. So it won't be that if the liquidation period is 6 months and 6 months is the restriction period, then we are going to see an actual leaving your hand time of about a year, not 6 months. So that is where we need to be clear as to what is really happening. Is this a very liquid company? When is the restriction expiring? And after that, how long will it take to sell off this? So when we use this and we look at the prevailing market conditions that we saw initially when we started our discussion today, we find that the median liquidity and volatility, when we use them, then it becomes, as if you look at the bottom, the Asian average model, the Maghreb model, and the Longstaff model, they give you these three different ranges of discounts. What's the difference? We are looking at what is the information gap between buyer and seller. If there's no gap, the discounts are smaller, the degree of uncertainty is low. When all public information is known to both of them, but no private information is known, the discounts are higher, but they're still not extreme. But then when you don't have public information, and of course not private information, then at that point they become dark firms, and the discounts can really rise depending on the time. Okay. So when markets are doing extremely well, the discounts will be low. When markets are doing extremely poorly, the discounts will be very high. Any questions about how we got from the median holding to a smaller block of holding, or is that something which is clear? Any questions? The theory side of it, the practical side of it. So let's look at that. So this is the large stocks. This is, we are looking at S&P 500, S&P 100 kind of stocks. What happens when we are looking at the small companies at the bottom of the size spectrum? See where the discounts are going? 2008, 9, 10. What is happening? This 2008, 2009, the market is totally dry for the smaller stocks. If you don't have information and you're trying to sell a very small stock, even a 10% block would have attracted a discount of close to 70%. Current conditions, about 40%. So that is where the big range is. If you're looking at the large stocks, 20% right now. When we are looking at the small stocks, about 40% or more than that slightly. So what we see is that the smaller firms with less information available, which most of the unregistered smaller stocks, smaller companies are falling in this range. So their discounts are significantly higher than the publicly traded large stocks, which are followed by a lot of analysts, and you end up having a lot of good information available about them most of the time. Okay. So this is where we start seeing that the gaps are very large. And if we add, so this is what we are looking at, unrestricted stocks. If we add restrictions, then the numbers become even much bigger. So, any questions up to this time? Pratik, Andrew, do we have anything that our participants are interested in knowing? Any questions?
If anybody has any questions, please use the chat feature. Oh, sorry, that I heard something.
Yeah, I heard something, but didn't make it.
We can proceed. I don't think there are any questions.
Okay. See, then there's a set of tables I would like to show. They're part of the paper, but they're not part of the the PowerPoints, but they were rather large. They were not fitting into the PowerPoint. So I would like to share a couple of those. One of the things that has happened in historically, when people started using long staff model and then started looking at, for example, Finity, there are two things that have come up. Okay. One is that there's some discussion about why are dividends not part of these models? Okay. And because in the standard Black-Scholes kind of option models, when we look at a call option, we do see that if there are dividends being paid, the value of the call option goes down. Okay. The reason is that if you are holding a call option and do not own the stock, and the firm issues any dividends, holders of the stock itself do get those dividends, but holders of the call options do not get those dividends. Okay, so that's why an adjustment has been made historically for that. But the difference here is that we are comparing the holders of the fully tradable registered stock versus the holders of unregistered or restricted stock that cannot sell it right now. Except in both of those cases, what is happening? We do have the dividends being available to the holders, whether they hold unrestricted or restricted stock. So that is why in these option models, we do not adjust for the payment of dividends, because they are in fact being received if you hold the restricted stock. You don't have to wait till the restriction is lifted to be receiving that dividend. Okay, so that is why it appears that no additional adjustment is required. Okay. Then the question becomes, just a minute, I'm just going into a different screen to pull up the tables. The question becomes, and I mean, even though it has been more specifically asked about the long staff model, because people look at that and say, oh, the discount is more than 100%. Okay. So that is something which has become very contentious and very interesting. I mean, so that's the important part. I'm going to the table to be able to bring it onto the screen. So if anyone has that concern that we do not have a case where the discount goes above 100%, the thing is, in reality, you can never, ever have a discount which is more than 100%, because what would that mean? If, let's say, the discount is 110%, that means you will give someone that restricted stock and you will pay them 10% of the price of that stock on top of that for them to take it off of your hands. It's something toxic, okay, which is not quite true. I mean, the stock, which is going to become liquid after 6 months or 1 year, is not something that is so bad that you will have to pay someone to take it off of your hands. So that is a misnomer that has kind of found its way into some thinking. And for example, I mean, it's an extreme case, but in the Hitchner book, I mean, the 23 edition is coming. I don't know if they've changed it or not, but in the 2017 edition, this is an interesting situation. Let me see if I can move it to this slide, to the sharing side. Let me see. Okay, I'm going to try a new share to move this. Can you see a table that says table 9?
We do, yes, we do.
Okay, good. Because this is for the Asian average model. Interesting, the first set of lines that you see here, I'm replicating a Hittner's table. And there for the 1 year, 2 year, and 5 year, looking at the different volatility. This is the set that shows up in the book saying these are the discounts based on the options formula. Except what is happening? They are looking at these numbers are the value of a call option when you're holding a restricted stock and you want to get an unrestricted stock. So you have fairly high numbers. Now, in reality, what happens? The discount that's actually applicable is you're holding the unrestricted stock and you're looking at by what percentage price the price would have to be cut to what you would pay for the restricted stock, which is similar in all other respects. So that is why what you see is that compared to the applicable discount, if you look at the call value, as if you were holding the restricted stock, how many shares of the restricted stock you would go and sell in addition to itself. So to get 1 share of the unrestricted stock. So this is the difference. This conversion ratio is the ratio between the two discounts. So you end up overstating the discount by a substantial amount. Now, for an Asian average model, since the overall discounts are small, you really cannot have a discount which is more than 25% under that model. So the degree of misstatement is relatively small and sometimes gets ignored. Okay. We go to the next table where we are looking at the Margrave exchange, which is the equivalent of Black-Scholes. There, the discrepancy does become significant. So what Hittner's calculation would say, the discount is 63%. That's actually, when you start looking at the put discount, is only 38%. So you are almost close to doubling the discount. With the look back put, it gets even worse because there you are seeing the discounts being 241%. So which means basically, if you had 100 shares valued at $1 each of the restricted stock, you would give it to someone and you will give them, in addition, another $140 to take them off of your hand. That's an important part. So the conversion factor is very large. So what we see is that the real discount under the Longstaff model would be about 70% in the extreme case, where it was being reported as 241%. Okay. So that's something that we need to be clear in our head about as to what is the discount and what is the asset to which we are applying that discount. Underlying thing being that you can never ever have a discount more than 100%, because that would mean you have to pay someone to take it from you, which doesn't really happen. So that's the kind of thing that we need to be thinking through and making sure we are looking at the put discounts and not the call premiums. Okay. So that is something we need to be very, very careful about. So that is what I had to say today. And if there's any questions, comments, concerns, would love to see those to make sure we have addressed those as of today. Of course, if you are
Dr.
interested,
Abbott,
yes.
looks like we have a question in the chat.
Okay,
Michael.
Let me open the chat window.
Okay.
So say I really, typically this is when the point when I do get some questions.
Yeah.
The frequent questions, just a moment. Can I see the chat window? Yeah, I can bring it up.
Peter on the Zoom.
Right. No, yes, Michael, I'm clear that if you are using the options model, then the dividend will not affect the DLAM. Follow up, Michael?
Maybe responds with that.
Yeah, sure. Because the idea is that if you are holding a restricted stock, you are receiving the dividend. It's not, if you have a call option, yes, you will not receive the dividend. The price of the call option should be going down. But if you are holding a restricted stock, doesn't the dividend lessen the burden of marketability? Sure. What we are looking at is, in this case, if you are holding the restricted stock, you are receiving the dividend. If the restricted stock was not receiving the dividends for some reason, I don't know why, but that's not, in reality, if you're holding stock, which is on which dividends are being paid, then in that case, you are receiving those dividends. That's the important part. So that's what we need to be clear about. The lack of marketability is the inability to get money for what you have to sell. If you are receiving those dividends, even though you cannot sell the stock, there's no impairment occurring as a result of the dividends being paid. Anything else?
Looks like we don't.
Okay.
Rabbit, do you have any more closing comments before we close out?
Would love to hear from you. And if then at the end of this presentation, we do have a list of all the papers that have been published. So if you look at the last 2 slides, you will see, if you want to read up on the literature, what has been published, what the different takes on this are, please go ahead, look at that list and read through, and hopefully we will have more discussions. Anytime you have a question, you have a comment, there's something which is not making sense, send me an email. You have my email on the slide. I look forward to hearing from you at any time. And I do respond. I mean, I might have to wait till the next weekend to be able to sit down and respond. But anytime you send me an email, I will respond.
Great. All right. Thank you, Dr. Abbott, and thank you everyone for joining us.
Thank you. It has been a pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And our next webcast will be on May 22nd at the same time, and we look forward to seeing everybody on that date. Thanks for joining us, and you all have a great day or evening, depending on where you're at in the world. Have a good one.
You too. Thank you. Bye then.